So we're finally getting our raid team stable. 3 months of solid progression.
Yeah, things are looking good. We've got a solid core group now.
Wait, did someone just post something in general? Let me check. Oh no, no!
What? What happened?
Someone just posted old Discord screenshots from 2019? When we were having drama about roster decisions.
I didn't even know those conversations were saved. I thought we'd moved past that.
They're posting them in public, tagging people, bringing up old grudges. They're saying we need to readdress what happened 5 years ago.
Who's doing this?
No idea. Anonymous account. But they're clearly someone from back then who's been sitting on these screenshots for years.
People are taking sides, saying we should have never let certain officers stay, bringing up names we haven't heard in 3 years.
This is insane. We resolved this drama years ago. People apologized, we moved on.
Not everyone moved on. Someone's been waiting for the right moment to weaponize it.
They're calling it resurrection of accountability. They're framing this like we buried a serious incident instead of just moving past it.
2 officers who rejoined us last year are getting attacked. People are saying they should never have been allowed back. But they apologized, made changes, we all decided to let it go.
So because someone dug up old screenshots, all of that forgiveness means nothing.
To whoever's doing this, forgiveness means we're weak and should be called out. They see moved-on conflicts as unresolved business.
This is destructive. And I don't even know who to defend ourselves against. It's anonymous. They can keep posting old drama, and we can't do anything about it.
Welcome back to MMO Madness Behind the Troll Mask. I'm Boss Mode, and today we're talking about resurrection trolls. The people who deliberately dig up old drama and force communities to relitigate conflicts they've moved past. These trolls weaponize forgiveness, transform growth into vulnerability, and turn history into ammunition. Let's explore how this works and why it's so devastating. Before we get into the stories, I want to explain what resurrection trolling is and why it's uniquely effective as a form of community destruction. Resurrection trolling is when someone deliberately exhumes old drama for the purpose of creating new conflict. They dig through Discord archives, Reddit history, forum logs, screenshots, or anything else that documents past conflicts. Then they strategically resurface that drama, usually by posting it publicly and tagging the people involved. The thing that makes resurrection trolling so effective is that it exploits the gap between where a community is and where it's been. A guild might have had serious drama 3 years ago. People fought, said harsh things, and made mistakes. But over time, the community processed that drama. People apologized, relationships healed, and everyone moved forward. The conflict is resolved in the community's present, even if it was real in the past. Then a resurrection troll arrives and says, "But wait, we need to deal with this." They take drama that a community has already processed and force them to process it again. Except this time, the people involved are defensive because they thought they had already dealt with this. They've moved on. The reopened wound hurts more the second time around. Resurrection trolling is particularly effective because it sounds righteous. The troll can frame it as a justice issue. People need to be accountable. We need to address what really happened. We've been burying this. It sounds like they've advocating for accountability, but what they're actually doing is weaponizing old pain for new drama. The resurrection troll rarely has personal stake in the original drama. They weren't the primary victim or perpetrator. They're a third party who stumbled onto or was giving old screenshots, and now they're using them as tools. They don't actually care about resolving the original conflict. They care about the chaos and attention that comes from resurrecting it. What makes this trolling particularly insidious is that it short circuits community healing. Healing requires that we move past grievances. A community's ability to heal depends on understanding that people can change, that mistakes can be forgiven, that the past doesn't have to define the present. Resurrection trolling says no, the past is eternal. Mistakes are permanent. Forgiveness is weakness. The resurrection troll weaponizes screenshots and logs because they're unchangeable evidence. You can't argue with a screenshot, even if the context has changed. Even if everyone involved has moved on, the screenshots prove that the hurtful things were said. The troll doesn't care about context, just the raw fact that the drama happened. They also weaponize timing. They wait until the community has moved past the drama, until relationships have healed, until people have let their guard down. Then they strike. The timing makes the resurrection more painful because people have to suddenly relive conflicts they thought were resolved. Resurrection trolling also preys on the fact that communities often don't have formal conflict resolution processes. When drama happens, communities deal with it informally. People talk, some people apologize. Relationships adjust. Life goes on. There's no official closure. So when the troll resurrects the drama, there's no frame of reference for, we already dealt with this officially. Everything becomes up for debate again. The most damaging resurrection trolls are the ones who were actually involved in the original drama and sat on it for years. Someone who was a part of an old conflict left the community and came back years later specifically to weaponize what happened. That's a form of premeditated revenge disguised as accountability. Now let's look at some of the most devastating cases where resurrection trolling destroyed communities that had already moved past their original conflicts. A Final Fantasy free company had experienced serious drama 5 years prior. A leadership member had engaged in inappropriate behavior with a member. There was a cover-up. It eventually came out, and the leadership member was removed. It was a traumatic incident for the community, but over 5 years the FC processed it. The leadership member apologized through third parties. The FC implemented new policies, and everyone moved on. New members joined who didn't even know about the incident. The FC became healthy and functional. Then someone, nobody knows who, started posting screenshots of the old Discord conversations where the incident had unfolded. They were posting them in public spaces, tagging the original victim, tagging the FC leader, tagging everyone involved. They framed it as exposing a cover-up and calling for accountability. But here's the thing. Accountability had already happened. The person was already removed. New systems were already in place. The victim had already processed their trauma with support from the community. The resurrection of the screenshots didn't create accountability. It created re-traumatization. The victim, who had spent 5 years healing, suddenly had their trauma broadcast to strangers on the internet. The FC, which had moved past the incident and had built something better, suddenly had its history weaponized against it. The poster's claim of wanting accountability was a cover for wanting to cause pain. The FC tried to respond by explaining the history, showing the changes they'd made, explaining that the people involved had already faced consequences. But the resurrection troll kept posting, kept tagging people, kept stirring up outrage. The original victim eventually had to quit Final Fantasy entirely to escape the repeated re-traumatization. An ESO guild had a toxic officer years ago. They were cruel to new players, stole the guild bank, and generally made the community worse. The guild leadership eventually kicked them. It was a difficult decision but necessary. The officer left, the guild healed. 5 years later, the guild was thriving. The officer had been forgotten. New members had no idea this person ever existed. Then the officer, who had been guild hopping unsuccessfully for years, decided to wage a resurrection campaign. They started a blog documenting their time in the original guild. They posted screenshots of the conversations where they'd been cruel to new players. They called it Exposing the Toxic Community That Cast Me Out. They gathered other players who had left the guild for various reasons and got them to post their grievances. The resurrection campaign worked. People outside the guild started believing there was something fundamentally toxic about the guild. Current members started questioning whether they were actually in a bad place. The guild's reputation suffered. Recruitment became harder. People left because they thought they were in a toxic community. The irony is that the community had already addressed the toxicity by removing the toxic person. The officer's resurrection campaign didn't reveal ongoing toxicity. It created it by forcing people to relitigate old conflicts. The officer had failed to destroy the guild through their actions, so they destroyed it through resurrection. A Guild Wars 2 streamer had made some problematic statement years ago. Nothing egregiously harmful, but mildly ignorant comments about mental health, marginalization, and social issues. The streamer grew, learned, apologized sincerely, and moved on. They spent 3 years being genuinely better about those topics. Then someone compiled all their old problematic statements into a video, added dramatic music, and posted it with the caption, "Accountability?" The video went viral. Thousands of people who had never watched the streamer before suddenly saw it as a condemnation. The streamer posted their apologies again, explained their growth, and had addressed how they had changed. But the resurrection campaign framed this as damage control, an insincere apology. The more the streamer tried to explain their growth, the more it looked like they were defensive. The streamer lost sponsorships, lost moderator positions in the communities, got harassed on social media. All because someone decided that an apology from years prior wasn't good enough and decided to resurrect the statement to punish the streamer for not staying canceled forever. What bothered me about this case is that the streamer had actually done the work. They had listened to the criticism, made genuine changes, become thoughtful about issues they used to be ignorant about. The resurrection troll essentially said, "None of that growth matters. You're permanently defined by who you used to be. That's not accountability. That's ensuring people can never move past mistakes." 2 RuneScape clans had feuded for years. They had PvP conflicts, trash talk, some bad behavior from both sides. It was kind of the gaming rivalry that was intense at the time, but eventually wound down as players moved on or quit. Then one clan disbanded. The members joined various guilds, including some that had formerly been rivals. The clans that had absorbed former enemies started mixing peacefully. Time had healed the wound. One former member of the disbanded clan who'd quit RuneScape entirely suddenly returned. They created a video essay called The RuneScape Clan Wars, a documentary. In it, they detailed all the old drama, all the trash talk, brought up specific incidents from 8 years prior, and called for the community reckoning. The video spread through RuneScape community. Suddenly, players who weren't even alive for the original conflicts were taking sides. The video gave voice to grievances that people had long since moved past. It resurrected feuds that had spent years settling. Clans that had peacefully coexisted started arguing again. Players who had become friends despite old clan rivalries became suspicious of each other. The community fractured over drama that had been dead for a decade. The troll had weaponized history and destroyed current peace. New World had aggressive early-day company conflicts over territory control. Companies would do things that seemed harsh at the time, blocking access to zones, hoarding resources, kicking members who defected. In the early days of the game, this was the meta. But as the game matured, the community became less cutthroat. Companies that had warred became allies or at least peaceful rivals. People who had felt wrong in the early game conflicts moved on. Then someone created a comprehensive Reddit post documenting all the atrocities early companies had committed. They tagged the company leaders and called for server-wide accountability. They framed early aggressive tactics as unforgivable betrayals that needed addressing. The post went viral. The companies that had moved on suddenly had to defend actions from 2 years ago. Current members who weren't even in the game back then had to hear about ancient grievances. The drama that the game had evolved past was suddenly front and center again. The resurrection effort failed to actually create accountability because there was no structure for it. But it exceeded in damaging current relationships and reopening old wounds. The troll didn't care about real justice, they cared about chaos. An MMO guild had a private officer Discord where leadership discussed sensitive topics, roster decisions, member conflicts, personal information people had shared in confidence. The Discord was intended as a safe space for officers to coordinate. Someone leaked the entire Discord history online. Years of conversations were suddenly public. Decisions that officers had made with good intentions were recontextualized as malicious. Confidential information about members was exposed. The leak was devastation enough on its own. But then a resurrection troll arrived. They used the leaked conversations to weaponize the guild's past decisions. Look, the officers discussed this person behind their back. Never mind that the person had asked for confidential guidance. Look, officers disagreed about this policy. Never mind that they eventually agreed on the best approach. The troll weaponized the leak information to make the guild look corrupt. All the guild's past decisions look suspicious when you cherry-pick conversations from private channels. The resurrection campaign worked by making transparent leadership look nefarious. The guild never recovered from both the leak and the resurrection weaponization of it. Even when they explained the context, the damage was done. Let me explain why resurrection trolling is so effective at destroying communities and why it's harder to defend against than most forms of trolling. First, resurrection trolling exploits the fact that communities usually don't have formal conflict resolution or statutes of limitations on old drama. In the legal system, there's statutes of limitation. You can't prosecute someone for something that happened decades ago, but in gaming communities, there's no such protection. Old drama can be weaponized at any time with no time limit. Second, it weaponizes screenshots and logs as unchangeable evidence. A community can explain the context, explain how they moved past it, but the screenshot is the raw fact. Someone said something hurtful. It's documented. You can't argue with a screenshot even if the context is completely different now. Third, resurrection trolling creates a perverse incentive structure. It punishes communities for healing. If a community processes drama, apologizes, and moves on, they are made vulnerable to resurrection. Communities that bury drama and refuse to address it are actually safer from resurrection because there's less raw material to weaponize. So, resurrection trolling creates an incentive to not process conflicts. Fourth, it exploits forgiveness as weakness. In a healthy community, forgiveness is a strength. It's how we move past harm and rebuild relationships. But resurrection trolling reframes forgiveness as weakness. They got away with it and we're just letting them. This makes communities afraid to forgive because forgiveness becomes an opening for future resurrection attacks. Fifth, resurrection trolling is effective because it sounds righteous. The troll can frame it as accountability, justice, or just transparency. They can say they're protecting the community by exposing past wrongdoings. This righteousness is actually a cover for destruction, but it makes the resurrection feel legitimate to outsiders. Sixth, it exploits the fact that outside observers don't have context. Someone who wasn't there when the original drama happened only sees the screenshots and the troll's framing. They don't see the resolution, the apologies, the healing that happened afterward. They just see, look at this bad thing, and assume the community hasn't addressed it. Seventh, resurrection trolling creates impossible defense positions. If you defend the people accused in the old drama, you look like you're defending the bad behavior. If you don't defend them, you're affirming that they should be punished again for already addressed harm. There's no winning response. And finally, resurrection trolling is effective because the original drama is often real. This isn't a false accusation, something actually happened. The troll is just choosing to weaponize it years later rather than accepting that it's been addressed. The authenticity of the original incident makes the resurrection harder to dismiss as troll behavior. So how do communities actually deal with resurrection trolls? Because traditional responses don't work when someone's weaponizing authentic old drama. The first instinct is usually to defend against the accusations. You explain the context, show that the people involved have apologized, demonstrate the changes that were made, but this doesn't work because you're re-arguing the original conflict. Every explanation becomes a new point of contention. The resurrection troll gets what they wanted, new conflict around old drama. Some communities try to ignore the resurrection troll completely. They refuse to engage with the old drama, insist that the community has moved past it, and continue functioning normally. This can work if the resurrection effort is small and doesn't gain traction. But if it spreads, ignoring it just makes it look like the community is avoiding accountability. The most effective response is actually to acknowledge the old drama without defending every aspect of how it was handled. You say, yes, this happened. It was a problem. We've addressed it. People have changed, and we've moved on. You don't try to convince the troll to argue about specifics. You're speaking to the broader community, not the troll. But the hard part is knowing when to stop engaging. Resurrection trolls want conversation about the old drama. Endless conversation is their goal. At some point, a community has to say, we've explained our position, we've addressed what needed addressing, and now we're moving forward. And then actually move forward. Some communities prevent future resurrection attacks by being more transparent about how they handled conflicts. They document their processes. They make conflict resolution public in appropriate ways. They show ongoing commitment to change. This removes some of the ammunition from future resurrection trolls because the community can point to documented efforts. Others implement a form of statute of limitations. They say that drama older than a certain point isn't relevant to current community decisions. This protects communities from being perpetually defined by their worst moments. It also protects people who've genuinely changed. They're no longer permanently accountable for who they used to be. The hardest part of protecting the original victims of the drama is it gets resurrected. If someone was genuinely harmed years ago, having that harm weaponized for new drama re-traumatizes them. Communities need to prioritize their safety and well-being over engaging with the resurrection trolls. This sometimes means removing the resurrected drama from public spaces without trying to engage with it. Not because the original drama wasn't real, but because the resurrection of it is just new harassment. The community can acknowledge that something happened, that it was addressed, and that continuing to publicize it serves no purpose except to harm people who have already suffered. What resurrection trolls really hate is being ignored. They want conversation about the old drama. They want conflict. When a community refuses to engage, refuses to re-argue the old conflict, just moves forward, the troll loses their power. Let me talk about something deeper here, the actual ethics of what resurrection trolling does to concepts like accountability and forgiveness. There's a real tension in communities about whether old drama should be remembered or forgotten. On one side, you have people who believe in accountability, that people should remember what happened so similar mistakes aren't repeated. On the other side, you have people who believe in forgiveness, that people can change and shouldn't be permanently defined by their past mistakes. Resurrection trolling exploits this tension. The troll can frame themselves as advocating for accountability while actually just weaponizing pain. They sound righteous because they're using the language of justice. But what they're actually doing is preventing people from ever moving past harm. Real accountability is about consequences and change. Someone does something wrong, there are real consequences. They change their behavior and then they're allowed to move forward as a changed person. Resurrection trolling says, nah, there are no time limits on consequences, and change behavior doesn't matter because the past is eternal. This actually prevents real growth. If people know that apologies and changes won't matter, that they'll be permanently judged by their worst moment, then there's no incentive to change. Resurrection trolling teaches people that forgiveness is impossible, so why bother trying to improve? Real justice is supposed to have limits. You serve your sentence, you're released, you apologize, the debt is paid. There's supposed to be a point where the account is settled. Resurrection trolling denies that possibility. It says you're never allowed to move past what you did. For a victim, there's another problem. Real healing requires that the person who harmed you can eventually be released from being perpetually defined as a perpetrator. If you spend years being angry at someone, you're spending years letting them live in your head. At some point, healing requires letting go. Not forgetting what happened, but releasing the demand for eternal punishment. Resurrection trolling prevents that healing. It says victims and perpetrators are locked in eternal conflict. The original victim is locked into the identity of person who was harmed, and the perpetrator is locked into person who caused harm. Neither gets to move on. The communities that handle this best are ones that distinguish between remembering history and weaponizing it. They remember what happened, not to punish, but to prevent repetition. They acknowledge the harm, they document the changes, and they actively release people from perpetual judgment. They also protect their members from resurrection attacks by creating boundaries around what can be weaponized. They say that engaging with old drama repeatedly isn't community building, it's community destruction, and they're willing to enforce that boundary by removing people who keep trying to weaponize the past. Resurrection trolls are unique because they don't create the drama themselves. They excavate it, weaponize it, and force communities to relitigate conflicts that are already resolved. If you're a resurrection troll, understand what you're actually doing. You're not creating accountability, you're preventing it by making forgiveness impossible. You're not seeking justice, you're seeking revenge on behalf of people who have already moved on. You're destroying healing for the sake of chaos. And if you're in a community being attacked by a resurrection troll, know that you don't have to keep relitigating old conflicts. You can acknowledge what happened, affirm that it's been addressed, and refuse to keep litigating it. You can protect your members from re-traumatization by setting boundaries around what gets discussed and what doesn't. The past is real, but it doesn't have to define the present. Communities that allow people to change, that set limits on how old drama can be weaponized, that distinguish between remembering and punishing, those communities are stronger. There's places where people can heal and grow. Next week on MMO Madness Behind the Troll Mask, we're diving into hype trolling, creating fake leaks and rumors. We're talking about misinformation as a trolling tool. You definitely don't want to miss it. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and support the podcast. And if you've experienced a resurrection trolling, email us at podcast@mmomadness.com. Until then, remember your past, learn from it, but don't be trapped by it. I'm Boss Mode, and thanks for listening.